A Brief History of Modern Mongolia for Political Risk Analysts by Corey's Political Risk Analysis. This is a historical summary of Mongolia from 1914 to 2025. Part 1. Mongolia during World War I and the fall of Qing rule, 1914 to 1921. At the time of World War I, Mongolia was in a state of political flux. In 1911, taking advantage of the collapse of the Qing dynasty, Mongolia had declared its independence, establishing the Bagd Khanate under the spiritual leader Bagd Khan. However, its independence was fragile and contested by both China and Russia, two powers with competing interests in the region. While Mongolia was not directly involved in World War I, the Russian Revolution of 1917 and ensuing chaos significantly impacted Mongolia. With the weakening of Russian influence and China's attempt to reassert control, Mongolia became a battleground for different political forces, including Chinese troops, White Russian anti-Bolsheviks, and local nationalists. Part 2. The Mongolian Revolution and Soviet Influence from 1921 to 1924. In 1921, with support from the Soviet Red Army, Mongolian revolutionaries, led by Damdin Sukhabatar, overthrew the Chinese-backed forces and expelled the White Russian Baron, Roman von Ungern-Sternberg, who had briefly seized control of the capital, Urga, now Ulaanbaatar. This marked the Mongolian People's Revolution. By 1924, following the death of Bagd Khan, the monarchy was abolished, and the Mongolian People's Republic, or the MPR, was proclaimed, the second socialist state in the world after the Soviet Union. Mongolia entered a long era of Soviet-style governance, heavily dependent on the USSR economically and militarily. Part 3. Stalinism and Transformation, 1925 to 1945. Throughout the 1930s, under the leadership of Khorloogiin Choibalsan, Mongolia underwent dramatic social and political transformation. The government backed by Joseph Stalin launched purges against perceived enemies, particularly the Buddhist clergy. Monasteries were destroyed and tens of thousands of monks were executed or imprisoned. Key reforms during this period included land collectivization, state ownership of industry, suppression of religion, and Sovietization of education and culture. Mongolia also became a strategic buffer state between the USSR and Japan. In 1939, Mongolian and Soviet troops fought the Battle of Khalkhin against Japanese forces, a decisive victory that influenced Japan's strategic decisions during World War II. Part 4. Post-war socialist development from 1945 to 1980s. After World War II, Mongolia solidified its alignment with the Soviet Union. In 1945, it held a referendum on independence from China, which overwhelmingly passed, leading to formal recognition by China in 1946. Mongolia was then internationally recognized as an independent nation, although it remained largely isolated. From the 1950s to 1980s, Mongolia followed the Soviet model: centralized economy and planned development, expansion of education and healthcare, development of mining, particularly copper and coal, creation of modern infrastructure under Soviet aid. Though somewhat repressive, the regime brought about modernization and literacy. Mongolia also played a limited role in Cold War geopolitics, remaining firmly within the Soviet sphere but avoiding deep involvement in international conflicts. Part 5. Democratic Revolution and Market Reforms from 1990 to 2000. The collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s had profound effects on Mongolia. In 1990, mass protests and hunger strikes led to the peaceful end of the one-party socialist regime. A new multi-party democratic system was introduced, along with a free market economy. The Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party, or the MPRP, relinquished its monopoly on power, and the country adopted a new democratic constitution in 1992, renaming itself simply Mongolia. However, the transition was economically painful. There was loss of Soviet aid, which caused severe hardship. There was hyperinflation and unemployment that surged. Many state-owned enterprises were privatized. Despite these challenges, Mongolia held regular democratic elections and maintained a relatively stable political system compared to other post-socialist countries. Part 6: The Mineral Boom, from 2000 to 2015. In the 2000s, Mongolia experienced a resource-driven economic boom, largely fueled by its vast mineral wealth, particularly copper, gold, and coal. The development of the massive Oyu Tolgoi copper and gold mine, backed by foreign investment, notably Rio Tinto, transformed the economy. Key developments during this period include rapid GDP growth, at times exceeding 10% annually, urbanization, especially in Ulaanbaatar, increased ties with China, which became Mongolia's largest trading partner, efforts to maintain a third neighbor policy, balancing relations with the US, Japan, and Europe. However, the boom also brought problems: corruption, environmental degradation, and economic inequality. Over-reliance on the mining sector made Mongolia vulnerable to commodity price swings. Part 7: Political instability and economic challenges, from 2015 to 2020. After the boom years, Mongolia's economy slowed significantly due to falling global commodity prices, rising national debt, and political infighting and frequent changes in leadership. Mongolia witnessed high turnover in prime ministers and shifting party coalitions. Corruption scandals plagued both major parties: the Mongolian People's Party, the MPP, and the Democratic Party, or the DP. Public dissatisfaction with elites increased. Efforts were made to stabilize the economy, including IMF assistance in 2017. Fiscal discipline and renegotiation of mining contracts helped Mongolia rebound modestly. Part 8: COVID-19 and Resilience, from 2020 to 2023. Mongolia responded early to the COVID-19 pandemic, closing borders and imposing strict lockdowns, initially successful in avoiding major outbreaks. The country later faced waves of infections, but managed them better than many others. The pandemic strained the healthcare system and disrupted trade, especially with China, which closed border crossings. Nonetheless, Mongolia demonstrated notable social cohesion and public trust in science-based health responses. Domestically, the 2021 presidential election saw former Prime Minister Uknagin Kurulsuk, I can't pronounce it, elected, consolidating power under the MPP. His presidency marked continued emphasis on economic diversification, anti-corruption, and sustainable development. Part 9: Mongolia in 2025. Strategic Crossroads. By 2025, Mongolia stands at a strategic and economic crossroads. It remains a landlocked democracy sandwiched between two authoritarian giants, Russia and China, but maintaining an independent foreign policy through its third neighbor approach. Geopolitical dynamics. Mongolia is navigating rising Sino-Russian alignment while maintaining neutrality in conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine war. China remains vital for trade, while Mongolia seeks closer ties with democratic nations for investment and diplomatic balance. Economic outlook. Mining continues to dominate, but Mongolia is actively promoting renewable energy tourism and agriculture to diversify its economy. Projects like rail infrastructure and green energy aim to reduce dependency on Chinese ports and fossil fuels. The country is working to manage urban pollution, rural depopulation, and climate change, especially desertification in the Gobi region. Domestic politics. Democracy remains resilient despite elite corruption and polarization. Civil society and media play active roles, though challenges remain in judicial independence and press freedom. Mongolia's population, around 3.5 million, is young and increasingly tech savvy. A new generation of leaders and entrepreneurs is emerging, pushing for innovation, transparency, and modernization. Conclusion. From a theocratic kingdom under threat in the early 20th century to a Soviet satellite and finally a modern democracy, Mongolia's journey from 1914 to 2025 is marked by resilience and reinvention. While landlocked and geopolitically vulnerable, Mongolia has carved out a unique path, a democratic state in an authoritarian neighborhood, balancing tradition with transformation. The coming years will test its ability to diversify its economy, preserve its democratic institutions, and assert its sovereignty amid intensifying regional pressures.